A man offers a meal to a poor boy, unaware that this small act of kindness will alter his fate forever. 40 years later, the sound of jet engines roars over his quiet farm, and a private jet lands in his backyard. Who was that boy? And why has he returned after all these years? Welcome to Legacy Tales. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe because we upload daily to inspire you. Also, tell us from which country you are watching. It was a cold evening in a small town, the kind where everyone knew each other's names but not their struggles. James, a middle-aged man with a worn-out jacket and calloused hands, sat in a corner booth of an old diner. He wasn't rich, just a hard-working man trying to make ends meet. As he sipped his coffee, he noticed a small boy, no older than 10, staring hungrily at the counter. His clothes were tattered, his shoes barely holding together. James had seen that look before, the kind of hunger that made your stomach twist in pain. He waved the boy over and gestured for the waitress. "Get him whatever he wants," James said with a gentle smile. The boy hesitated at first, his eyes wide with disbelief. But then, as if fearing the offer might vanish, he quickly sat down and started eating. James didn't ask for his story. He didn't need to. He knew the world was unfair, and sometimes all someone needed was a little kindness to keep going. As the boy finished his meal, he looked up at James, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, sir. I won't forget this." James simply nodded, never expecting to see him again. But fate had other plans, because 40 years later, long after James had forgotten that night, a strange noise shook his quiet farm. He stepped outside, shielding his eyes from the sun, and what he saw made his heart race. A massive private jet was landing, right in his backyard. Who could it be? Why would a jet, something only the wealthiest people owned, land here of all places? As James took slow, cautious steps toward it, the door opened and a well-dressed man stepped out. His face was familiar, yet James couldn't quite place it. But when the man smiled, something clicked in his memory. Could it be the same boy he had once fed all those years ago? James stood frozen as the man walked toward him, his expression unreadable. Then with a firm handshake, he said something that made James's hands tremble. "I told you I wouldn't forget." James felt his breath hitch. The boy from the diner, standing before him as a grown man, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than James had earned in years. But how? What had happened in those 40 years? And why was he here now, in a private jet, looking at James with such deep gratitude in his eyes? James wiped his hands on his worn-out jeans, his voice shaking. You remember me?" The man let out a small chuckle, but there was emotion behind it. "Of course I do. How could I forget the man who changed my life?" James stared at him, still struggling to connect the poor, hungry boy with the powerful figure standing before him. The man turned and signaled toward the jet. Almost instantly, two more people stepped out. One was a sharply dressed assistant, holding a briefcase, and the other was an elderly woman with kind eyes. The moment she saw James, tears filled her eyes. You're the one who fed my son when no one else cared," she whispered. James's mind was spinning. What was going on? He had done nothing special, just paid for a meal. How could that one moment lead to this? The man stepped closer. "That night, you didn't just give me food. You gave me hope. My mother had lost her job, and we had nowhere to go. I thought the world didn't care about people like us. But then, you showed me kindness, and it changed everything." James felt a lump in his throat. He had no idea. All these years, he had never given that night a second thought. Then the man took the briefcase from his assistant and placed it in front of James. "Open it." James hesitated. His rough hands trembled as he slowly unlocked the case. The moment he saw what was inside, his legs almost gave out. His eyes widened. His heart pounded. This couldn't be real. Stacks of cash, legal documents, a set of keys. James looked up, completely speechless. The man smiled. "This is my way of saying thank you. And trust me, it's just the beginning." James's hands trembled as he stared at the briefcase, his throat tightening. He had lived his entire life barely making ends meet, never once expecting something like this. The man in front of him, The boy he had helped decades ago was now offering him something he never thought possible. But James couldn't bring himself to touch it. He swallowed hard, shaking his head. I don't understand, he whispered. I just paid for your meal. It was nothing. The man's expression softened, but his voice was firm. No, James, it was everything. He took a deep breath, his eyes glistening with emotion. That night I was starving. My mother had lost everything. Her job, our home, our dignity. We had no one. No one except you. You were a stranger, yet you showed me kindness when the world turned its back. Do you know what that did for me? James remained silent, his eyes locked onto the man's. You made me believe in goodness again. That meal wasn't just food, it was hope. It was proof that even in the darkest moments, there are people who care. And that hope kept me going. His voice cracked slightly. I worked, I struggled, but I never gave up because I wanted to be like you, a man who helps others, no matter how little he has himself. The elderly woman, the man's mother, stepped forward, tears running down her cheeks. We never forgot you, James, she whispered. Every night I prayed that one day we'd find you. And now here we are. James's chest ached. He had spent years believing his life had been ordinary, insignificant. But to them he had been a hero. The man placed a hand on James' shoulder. This money isn't charity, it's gratitude. And these papers, he pointed to the documents in the briefcase, they transfer ownership of a new home. Your home. You'll never have to struggle again. James's vision blurred with tears. I can't accept this. You can, the man said gently, because you earned it. You changed my life, and now I want to change yours. James's legs felt weak, his heart overwhelmed. A single moment of kindness, a simple act of paying for a meal, had come full circle in the most unimaginable way. He wiped at his eyes, laughing through the tears. I never thought. The man smiled. That's the thing about kindness, James. It always finds its way back. The wind rustled through the trees, the sun casting a golden glow over them. James finally reached out and gripped the man's hand firmly. Thank you, he choked out, for remembering. The man squeezed his hand in return. Thank you for giving me something worth remembering. Morale of the story, sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create ripples that turn into waves. We never know how a single moment of compassion can shape someone's future. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss another inspiring tale. And tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment where kindness changed your life? We'd love to hear your story.